Yeah, enlarge your screen there so the green line will go away.
Oh, I guess they have to do that every time, huh?
Who knows how Windows thinks?
All right. Let's see. I forgot what this one is. Oh, more propagation, but HF. Because you can do 10 meters, and that's the top of the HF band. Um, so by using propagation techniques, you can basically send a radio wave all the way around the Earth back to yourself under the right conditions. It's due to the refractions in the ionosphere, which are caused by solar radiation. So obviously, the more solar radiation, the more the ionization. So the more refraction that you get. Um, and we talked about before that you had the D, E, and F layers, where in the daytime, the F layer actually splits into two, F1 and F2. And at night, it's back to a single layer, and the D layer disappears, and you have a reduced E layer because they have to retain the ionization from the daytime. So that's one of the reasons why uh, the bands are affected less during the nighttime hours because it's not getting any additional radiation, at least not from the sun. This is just one showing the difference between the nighttime and the daytime layers again, and the height of the different parts of the atmosphere, where you see the troposphere we talked about for ducting and stuff down at the very bottom, and then the exosphere and thermosphere at the upper layers where the F layer is. It's a prettier chart, kind of the same thing, showing how different frequencies are obviously refracted differently. So the higher the frequency, the less refraction. So the higher they go. So at higher frequencies, you can get longer distances if you have enough refraction that it actually bends it back to the Earth. And again, it's kind of the same thing, night and day comparison. We're showing 10 megahertz. Daytime, it's refracting off of the F2 layer, and nighttime, it's off of the what would have been the F1 layer, or somewhere in the middle, because it's compressed into a single smaller layer. And another one. I probably don't need all these. In fact, I thought about that last night going through them. I needed to get rid of some of those. They're kind of redundant. Which region of the atmosphere can refract or bend HF and VHF radio waves?
Charlie.
Charlie, what's a characteristic of HF communication compared with communications on the VHF and higher frequencies?
Charlie?
Charlie, you can get some long distance on VHF and UHF, but it's not nearly as common as it is on HF. At certain parts, like where we are now in the sunspot cycle, where we're getting close to the peak, HF long distance propagation is very, very common. Now see, what are we? Started in 21. So the peak would be what, 26, something like that.
I think they're saying the peak is gonna be somewhere late 25 to early 26.
So 11 years from there, we'll have another peak. And then we're going to start going down in the middle.
But there will be a few years there where UHF and VHF becomes more popular again.
Okay. Sunspot cycles are what actually affects the propagation, because it increases the amount of radiation that the ionosphere is receiving. So it increases the amount of ionization. And like we just mentioned, seems to be an 11-year cycle. We're in cycle 25 since they started. I mean, it's been going on since before the Earth was created, but
Yep.
Since they started counting, we're in cycle 25, which started sometime in 2021. So we've got a couple years before we get to the peak of the cycle, and then it'll start decreasing down. And at the end of that 11-year cycle, communications propagate long distance is not going to be very good. So obviously, the more sunspots you have, the more radiation reaches the Earth, the more ionization, the better the refraction. So you need to take advantage of it while you can. Oh, and here's that same chart again, but kind of just showing what a long distance hop might look like. And actually, that 28 degrees is a relatively high takeoff angle. With the right antenna, for instance, a vertical at the right height, you could get that down to a few degrees and get some really long hops. And again, this is one showing the difference between what happens to the different bands night and day. So which of the following bands may provide long distance communications? Of the choices.
Alpha?
We had 2 alphas. Sounds good. Okay. The ionosphere actually changes, particularly in daytime, because it is atmosphere and it's a mixture of gases, and the amount of solar radiation varies. So how much it refracts is a variable. And you can get what we call fading, where you might have a strong signal when you start making a contact, and it may actually fade out because of kind of a multipath operation, because of the irregularity of the ionosphere itself, where some portions may refract more than others. So it's kind of a multipath type of effect. The propagation is going to be the best on the 10, 15, and 20 meter bands during the daytime. And I've kind of found out, at least now, 20 meters seems to work about the same day or night.
20 meters, a lot of people call it the money band because, I mean, it's best during the daytime, but it still works at night. So if you're only gonna build one antenna, build a 20-meter dipole and you'll have around the clock coverage.
The lower frequency bands tend to work at night because you don't have the D layer that absorbs them during the daytime. So they're allowed to actually propagate instead of being absorbed. So, the 160 up through 40 work best at night. This is just the overall band chart showing all of the amateur bands and the segments and the sub bands that different classes of operator can operate in. So what is generally the best time for a long distance 10-meter band propagation via the F region? You have to read this one carefully. You sure?
Delta.
Well, let's see. The two key possibles are high sunspot activity, alpha and Bravo. Okay. Low sunspot activity, you're not going to have, is not the best time for long distance 10-meter band. So it had to be alpha or Bravo. And it's best during the daytime. So alpha is dawn to sunset. That's daytime. So I said, read it carefully. They're very confusing answers.
No, it's just I'm not paying attention. It's all.
No, they're still confusing answers, but paying attention helps. What is the likely cause of irregular fading of signals propagated by the ionosphere? Yep. It's like multipath. In fact, it is multipath. Just not created by buildings and things. Okay. Polarization. It's not a big deal on the HF bands because I said the refracted waves come back elliptically polarized, so it really doesn't make a difference whether you have a vertical or horizontal polarized antenna. When you're doing VHF and UHF, where you're doing line of sight, it definitely makes a difference. You need to have the same polarization. One sort of exception is if you're trying to communicate with a satellite or the space station, because they rotate. Okay, their antenna is physically rotating, so you do have a rotating polarization. And typically, to counteract that, people will use cross-polarized antennas, where it's actually a horizontal and a vertical antenna together, so they can receive it either way. So if you see somebody doing satellite stuff, you'll see one of those antennas where you have elements going 90 degrees. So which of the following results from the fact that signals propagated by the ionosphere are elliptically polarized? What did you say?
under normal circumstances, both things. You know, where you're not bouncing something off the.
For line of sight, delta would be correct.
When you're bouncing it off the ionosphere, it starts tumbling as soon as it bounces. So it doesn't matter at that point, the polarization is.
So we learned that the ionosphere refracts HF and some VHF. You can get more consistent long distance propagation on HF than you can on VHF and UHF, even though it's possible to get some long distance on VHF. You can have fading because of the effectively multipath because of the variations in the ionosphere and the fact that it's always changing. I mean, it's atmosphere. I keep saying I'm gonna turn email off, but then I figure somebody might be trying to get in. Sunspot cycles basically are what allow long distance communications or propagation on the 6 and 10 meter bands. When the sunspot cycle is high, get a lot of sunspot activity. And that the 10 meter band is best during the day, dawn to shortly after sunset, when the sunspot cycle is high. So the 10 meter band won't be worth a damn here in 5-6 years.
Slipping off another 3 or 4, and then 5 or 6 years, it'll be almost nothing.
So, in polarization, the ionosphere actually affects and changes the polarization and creates what we call elliptically polarized waves. So, the polarization of the receiving antenna or even the transmitting antenna doesn't make any difference if the signal is being refracted off of the atmosphere. And I think that was all for today.